Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Good afternoon to those of you who are here, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those who are following us remotely. This is the first press briefing of the 13th Assembly of the Lutheran World Federation. We began today with opening worship in the big plenary hall, and it was absolutely beautiful. And now we have a moment to sit down with the LWF President, Archbishop Dr. Panti Philippus Musa, and the LWF General Secretary, Reverend Dr. Anne Burkhardt. We wanted to, and we have a number of you here with us, which is great. Thank you for being here. And we have a number of you following online also. And we are deeply grateful for that. A couple of practical matters. Because we're streaming this, we have to speak into the microphone. And my colleague Naveen, who is there, she has a microphone for those of you who might want to ask questions. We have approximately 30 minutes here. Because then we have the next plenary, which is starting at 2:30, and that's the opening plenary of the Assembly. So let's get into it. I think I wanted to sort of give the two of you a chance just to say a few words at the beginning about your impressions on the opening day. President Musa.
Thank you very much, Arnie, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really a very pleasant moment to be here in the city of Krakow for the 13th Assembly of the Lutheran World Federation. And I think we started on a very good note this morning with opening worship, where we shared together in music and listening to the Word of God and in communion, setting the tone for this assembly, that it is a gathering not only for legislative activities, but also is a spiritual and expression of what it means to be communion. So for that, I'm deeply grateful, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I can only affirm what President Musa just said. It has been a wonderful beginning. It was a very beautiful worship this morning, which also reflected the beauty of being a global communion, because we were singing hymns from different parts of the world. We were praying in different languages. We had ministers coming from different churches, and we hope that some of this beauty will also be reflected in what we will be reflecting and deciding during this assembly. And I believe that many felt that the one spirit we are talking about was around. So thank you.
Thank you both. Maybe to kick us off, I would be curious to hear from each of you what you would see as some of the, let's say, expected highlights, or what are you looking forward to in the coming days at the Assembly. Musa, if you start, and then, yeah.
Thank you once again, Arnie. I think it is, for me, very critical and important outcome of this assembly is the reaffirmation of our unity and understanding of being in communion as churches in the Lutheran tradition from around the world, from different cultures and contexts, to reaffirm that concept and understanding of being together, one. And I'm happy for the theme, which is very reflective of really who we are, one body. So that for me is a very important thing to reaffirm in our ongoing journey, but also to reaffirm our shared commitment towards being witnesses of Christ in the world that is facing so many challenges today. Obviously, we are called to be witnesses and to make a difference. Of course, there are items and issues on the agenda that we'll be taking. We will be electing our new president, who will then, together with a council that will handle the governance and the leadership of the communion from Krakow until we are looking forward to 2030, when we celebrate 500 years of the Augsburg Confession. Of course, there are thematic issues, and I think I can refer to the General Secretary to highlight some of those.
President Musa already referred to the importance of unity, but it is in fact more than just the importance of unity. It is the importance of unity in reconciled diversity, what we as the LWF have so much been speaking about. And I believe particularly in this regard, it is very important to give a strong witness in these days where we see so much polarization in the societies around us. We as churches are indeed called to set an opposite example to what we so often see in our societies, and to reflect how can we offer spaces where different opinions still come together and still reflect together how to be united for a higher cause together. And as President also already mentioned, there will be, of course, also business part to the Assembly, and we hope to get very clear direction and very clear guidance from the Assembly, which is our highest governing body, for the coming 7 years until the next Assembly, because this body is there to show us how to best put our faith in action.
Thank you both. I realized I have not introduced myself, and there's no name card, so let me do that now. My name is Arne Danielsen. I am the head of communication for the Lutheran World Federation. I think we want to open it up to questions. So Tsiri is monitoring online, and she will send me a message if we have any questions, but maybe we begin here in the room. Jan.
Yes, good afternoon, and first of all, many thanks for giving us the opportunity to ask you questions. I would like to ask you 2 questions on the ongoing war in Ukraine, which is about 200 kilometers away from us. In which way can the LWF contribute to a possible peaceful solution? Is there any way you can contribute to it? And secondly, especially a question for the President, what is your perspective on this war in in Europe, since in your continent there are so many wars? What is different in this context, in the European context for you? Thanks.
So if I start us off, well, first of all, the LWF has, since the beginning of the war in Ukraine or against Ukraine, been very clear in its messaging in condemning the war and calling for immediate withdrawal of Russian military forces from Ukraine. We have also been doing our best in terms of advocacy. We have also called for common prayer. And last but not least, we are actually effectively implementing humanitarian and development aid both in Ukraine and in neighboring countries, also through diaconal projects of our member churches, last but not least through our host church here in Poland, who has been very strongly supported also by the LWF in terms of supporting Ukraine refugees. And I believe that the role of churches might become even more important and stronger once this war is over, because then we will need a very long, probably very long, but also not very easy reconciliation process. And we hope that through our member churches, which we have both in Ukraine and in Russia, we will be able to contribute to this post-war reconciliation process, where we have so many good examples from Europe from the time before World War II, after the World War II, where churches strongly contributed to reconciliation processes between Germany and France and Germany and Poland, for instance.
And thank you. From my perspective, the initial reaction for us, of course, for me and for many from Nigeria, and I believe from the southern part of the world, is a shock. We would never imagine that a war would erupt in Europe, an area, part of the world where we perceived to be very peaceful, and a lot has been achieved over the years since the Second World War, at least. However, at the same time, it reveals to us also the vulnerability of the human family as a whole. that we cannot sit back and say there is one part of the world that has reached it. The human nature is there waging, and so it calls for ongoing efforts. That peace is never something we say a dead end. It's not an end itself. It's a process that it calls the churches to be more alert, to be watchful, but also in collaboration with different institutions, political, other religious bodies. So for me, it's a reawakening that we can't be complacent regarding what is happening around and in the world. We need concerted effort to strengthen what has been achieved so far, but also to build systems and mechanisms to ensure that, always there is a possibility for diplomatic engagement as a way to deal with our disagreements rather than resorting into war.
Thank you very much. I've seen three of you already, so if I can pass it on to you, as I don't know your name, maybe if all of you would just introduce yourself and where you come from.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Hans-Georg Kling from Cologne in Germany, from the Evangelical Church in the Rhinelands. I'm writing for the Rome Catholic News Agency. I have two questions, one to the General Secretary, the other to the President. My first question, thank you very much for this wonderful worship service this morning, but who was the leader of the part of celebrating Eucharist? I felt a certain gap between the excellent opening you have been doing, the marvelous sermon we heard, and then, in a way, a certain poor celebration of the Eucharist. My second question to you, President, you mentioned 2:30 already, the celebration of 500 years Augsburg Confession. What do you expect in this regard to the Roman Catholic Church? What steps forward will be done, and do you have in mind to prepare something for this? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. As we have been saying for several times, this is a space of dialogue altogether, where we meet. So I would probably also need a little bit more explanation what is exactly meant by poor celebration of Eucharist before responding at length to your question. If it is only about where the person as such came from, this is the Archbishop of the Estonian Evangelical Lutheran Church.
Thank you, Hans, for this question. The Lutheran World Federation understands itself within the wider frame of the church, ecumenical. So, like any other major events, historic events in the past, we don't see that 2030 is going to be an event just for internal, it's just for us Lutherans. It is, we anticipate, is a space that we are going to open. Hopefully it will also strengthen our understanding, self-understanding as ecumenical, but also provide space for a lot of conversation and reaffirmation of who we understand ourselves to be. I think the outcome of this assembly and the next council will set up processes towards 2030. However, again, we don't see this as an event and then after that you throw it away. It is a moment for really deepening our self-understanding, reflecting and connecting with the wider body of the church.
Thank you so much. Benjamin?
Thank you very much, Benjamin Lassive, Head of Correspondence. A question to the Secretary General and one to the President as well. How did the relationship between the Lutheran World Federation and its Russian member churches change since the beginning of the war in Ukraine? Can you tell something probably as well about the participation of Russian delegates at this assembly? And second question to the President, as you mentioned 2030, and we are in the year 2023 right now, 2023 plus 7 gives 2030. Are you expecting an assembly in Augsburg in 2030? Thank you.
First, to the question about our member churches in Russia, which are two, and both of them have never actively supported the war. So we have kept up connections to them, and as I mentioned earlier, we do hope that once the war is over, they can also be instrumental in contributing to the peace process. Our Europe Secretary has been in quite close contact with them, and as one may imagine, it is not necessarily very easy to be a church at the moment in this context that does not support the war against Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Well, it will be for the next council to decide where to have the next assembly. Of course, according to our constitution, we have assembly every 6 years. But for important landmarks like this, we have always considered the possibility to move it forward. So it's depending on the decision of the next council. At the same time, it would be also remarkable to do something in Augsburg. What will that be? It's the job of the next president and the council to decide. I wouldn't want to preempt what will happen. When we, I think 75 years, we went back to Lund. We did something, at least just as a memory, to retrace our steps. So, yeah, if you are inviting us to Augsburg, I think the next council will deal with that. Thank you.
We will probably deal with this assembly first, and then we prepare that. But it's good to think ahead. Lisbeth.
I'm Professor Lisbeth Christoffersen from Copenhagen, doing law and religion, and I write for a small internet-based publisher, Kirke.dk, in Denmark. And my question is concerned with, as I understand this, the General Assembly is the General Assembly for both the World Service, the hospital, and the theological work which you deal with in your presentations. So my question is, how will you also in the future ensure the theological commitment of the World Service and the work from the World Service through churches, etc., and also the other way around? So how will you, I mean, the World Service is really the big bird, at least economically speaking. So there must be some tensions around this. So how will you deal with that for the future? And of course, if you want, Mr. President, to tell also how you have dealt with it in this period, thank you then.
First, allow me to explain that the LWF is a very unique Christian communion among global Christian communions because it holds organizationally together both theological work with member churches, and humanitarian and development aid work, which is normally never the case, neither with our member churches nor with other global Christian world communions. For instance, with Roman Catholic Church, Caritas Internationalis is a completely separate organization institutionally. So this means that we always deal with two wings together, so to say, with the World Service and and with more theological work, with work with church leaders, and so on and so forth. And this is, of course, always the question, how to keep a good balance between the two sides, or even to put it more broadly, how to keep a good balance between all different aspects of holistic mission. And this is our constant question, and also our constant struggle, how to make sure that all these fields of work are well covered. Because if you compare it to a chair, if one leg is missing, then the chair starts to not to be very stable anymore. And I do hope that this assembly will also give us support in this understanding, because this is an idea that has been also emphasized in preparatory materials, in study guide, and so on and so forth.
No, thank you. Building on what the General Secretary has said, we have always understood what the World Service is doing as an integral dimension of our journey as a communion, never separate. Of course, the response, the beginning of the Lutheran World Federation had a lot to do with human suffering and the catastrophe that happened. At the same time, as we moved on, there was never a moment in the history of the Lutheran World Federation where we had this distinction. They are always interconnected. Now, you ask how we have dealt with this. I think we have increasingly grown in our understanding of this, trying to hold the two together, promoting understanding between world service in a country where we have member church or member churches. We have made intentional efforts to bring them together, sometimes create space for conversation and dialogue, but also in terms of framing our programmatic work through the communal office. We have never sat world service as apart from the entire communion office. So ongoing conversation at the communion office, but also in countries where we have world service. In my period as a president, we had lined up programs of visitation to countries where we had world service in order to strengthen this dimension of us understanding world service as a diaconal response of the Lutheran World Federation, whether there is a country program or not. Unfortunately, due to so many things that happened, COVID, I was able to visit only 2 countries. But there you sense the remarkable relationship between a member church and the world service, and the self-understanding that this is us working together.
Thank you so much. I think we'll wrap up now. There will be opportunities for, if you would like to interview the President or the General Secretary, please approach the media team we have here. They are here to help. Cornelia, maybe you stand up so everyone sees you. This is Cornelia Kestner, who leads that team. Reach out to her and she will assist you with anything. Thank you, President Musa and General Secretary Burkhardt, for taking the time to be with us. The schedule is busy. We are next going to move into the opening plenary, which begins in the S1 auditorium at 2:30. There you will give your address. And then tomorrow we will have the report of the General Secretary. These are live streamed on the Assembly website, which is lwfassembly.org. So you can follow everything there. Next press briefing is planned for tomorrow, and we are sharing a number of press releases also with you and some background materials. The press briefing, Cornelia, 14:30. Very good, 14:30. A note on the background materials, we did actually, because you were asking, Lisbeth, about the LWF World Service and the member churches, we published a few years ago a guidance note on the collaboration between them, and we can share a link to that with you or with those who are here, because it's been very impressive to see this actually through and through. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for also being at the Assembly to cover it. It matters a lot to us, and we are looking very much forward to see how you share this. Have a good afternoon.